Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating story about two mathematicians who attempt to use advanced set theory, calculus, and topology to map out something completely chaotic, the unbearable reality of human loss. It's this incredible journey about trying to solve the inherently unsolvable, and honestly, it completely changes how we look at the relationship between cold hard logic and raw human emotion.
So let's just jump right in with the exact moment this all begins. Imagine standing in a kitchen. Our protagonist, Elena, is there with her mother, who happens to be a high school geometry teacher. Her mom is cutting an apple into smaller and smaller pieces, casually demonstrating Zeno's paradox. You know, the idea that you can always have the distance to a destination, meaning the knife never actually reaches the very end. She looks at Elena and says, "Infinity is not a number, darling." And then, literally in the blink of an eye, a fatal aneurysm takes her life.
This devastating, sudden event triggers a profound dilemma for Elena. Now remember, Elena is a doctoral candidate in mathematics. She actually specializes in transfinite cardinals. So the immediate crashing reality of her loss forces her into this seemingly impossible question. How on earth can she translate an endless, all-consuming pain into finite terms? She actually tries to perform an inverse Zeno's paradox on her own timeline, trying to measure the hours and minutes finely enough to somehow slip between the moments and find her mother still there. But the math just doesn't bring her back.
Which brings us to Section 1, the infinity of grief. This impossible situation leads Elena to a major, mind-bending realization. Not all infinities are created equal. She becomes completely obsessed with writing a poem to capture the sheer scale of her grief. She calculates that if she uses the roughly 170,000 words in the English dictionary exactly once, she can create a combination of words so massive it absolutely boggles the mind. But here's the catch. To a mathematician, that is still just Aleph null. It's countably infinite. Her grief, though? Her grief requires Aleph 1. It requires the cardinality of real numbers. It's an uncounted, continuous infinity, exactly like the infinite space stretching between any 2 points on a line.
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive gap she's facing. Think about it. Human language is entirely discrete. It's countable. Every letter, every word, every punctuation mark. But what Elena is actually feeling inside is a continuous, uncountable pain. It's the infinity her mother's knife was traveling through. Elena realizes the true measure of her loss actually lives in the uncountable spaces between the words, not the words themselves.
Let's move on to Section 2, the limits of language. This frustrating struggle to find an uncountable language brings us to Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who is a visiting scholar at MIT. Elena stumbles upon a preprint paper authored by Yuki. In it, Yuki proves mathematically that any attempt to fit continuous feelings into countable words is necessarily incomplete. She essentially takes Cantor's diagonal argument, which is a famous mathematical proof showing some infinities are fundamentally larger than others, and applies it directly to human emotion. Yuki proves that the exact thing Elena is trying to do is mathematically impossible. There will always be irrational emotions that just slip right through the cracks of language.
So, things get really interesting when Elena and Yuki actually meet up and decide to collaborate. They try to mathematically define the grief function, g of t. And as Elena sketches this out, she realizes human sorrow takes on so many different mathematical shapes, and absolutely none of them perfectly capture the totality of loss. I mean, maybe grief is an inverse function that slowly approaches zero. Maybe it's exponential decay. Or maybe, and this is what Elena experiences every single night when she wakes up at a cold sweat at the exact minute her mother died, maybe it's a periodic oscillation, an anniversary that ruthlessly returns every single day at 3:47 a.m.
This takes us into Section 3, the calculus of emotion. Now, this collaboration pushes them entirely out of pure theory. It forces them to calculate the exact tangible weight of their broken hearts. You see, Yuki is grieving too, but her grief comes from her wife leaving her. And Yuki tries to use calculus to somehow rationalize her heartbreak. She maps the whole relationship out, comparing the finite measure of happy moments against the painful ones. She figures, well, happiness is just a single dimension of time, but the day her wife left was a day of infinite pain intensity. Therefore, the painful area infinitely drowns out years of finite happiness. She's desperately trying to mathematically prove her marriage was a net negative just so she can be glad it's over. But guess what? The human body and the heart completely reject this math.
Because logic totally fails to cure her jealousy, Yuki ends up creating an impossible liar's paradox inverse. She writes a poem that assumes her ex-wife still exists, but since she can't perceive her anymore, she must not exist. But wait, Her ex-wife texts her, so she definitely does exist. It's a complete contradiction. And it beautifully, perfectly mimics the irrational contradictions of the human heart. The poem proves it can't exist, therefore it doesn't, therefore it can, therefore it exists. It is perfectly, mathematically broken.
Moving right along to section 4, the topology of healing.
As their project pushes both of them to the absolute brink, they stop sleeping, they're losing weight, they're isolating themselves, they suddenly discover a profound insight. It was hidden in an old geometry paper written years ago by Elena's late mother. The paper used topological concepts to teach continuity. Let's actually walk through the physical exercise she used. Imagine taking a strip of paper. You write love on one side and grief on the other. Now give the paper a half twist and connect the ends together. If you start tracing the surface at love, you will eventually arrive right at grief without ever crossing an edge. Keep going, and grief becomes love again. It's a Möbius strip.
As Elena's mother wrote, boundaries are sometimes illusions. They are one continuous surface. This single thought completely reframes Elena's entire understanding. Love and grief aren't opposites. They aren't separate functions at all. They are the exact same continuous topological surface that you just travel along forever. The pain is only sharp because the bond was so incredibly deep.
Which leads us to our final section, the asymptotic approach.
They finally realize that they cannot actually solve their grief, and they certainly can't perfectly express it. Instead, they have to accept that true healing is a limit we can approach but never actually reach. Yuki had been meticulously tracking her daily mood for hundreds of days. Day 0, complete despair. Day 47, a massive physical spike in her heart rate when she mistook a stranger for her ex-wife. But by day 742, she finally sees a trend. The progress isn't perfectly linear. There are these jump discontinuities whenever she gets bad news, but her overall trajectory is asymptotically approaching a state of acceptance. She's hovering around a 6.8 out of 10. The derivative is decreasing. She is getting better, even if she's never going to hit a perfect 10 again. This beautiful realization leads Elena to draft what she calls the fundamental theorem of grief calculus. Just as the fundamental theorem of calculus states that integrating a rate of change yields the original accumulation, Elena mathematically defines the old saying that time heals all wounds. She proves that grief is essentially just the negative derivative of love. So if you integrate, if you accumulate and process grief over time, it transforms right back into the love that originally generated it. Love, just like energy, is conserved. It just changes state.
By fully embracing this incompletion, they decide to publish Volume 1 of their book, which they titled The Asymptotic Romantic. They accept that they're going to approach their limit forever without ever fully arriving. As Elena puts it, we're asymptotic romantics. We don't do arrival. They find peace knowing that while complete expression is impossible, some infinities can be contained just enough to survive them. The very act of trying to map the grief becomes the tool that helps them endure it.
And this explainer leaves us with a truly profound thought to reflect on. As you navigate your own continuous surface of love and loss, what is the ultimate limit you are asymptotically striving toward? The math might be imperfect, the poetry might be uncountable, but the approach itself, the act of moving forward, that is where the meaning lives. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible intersection of mathematics and human emotion with me.